My name's Cinda Chillen. I manage our spacesuit knowledge capture program, and I'm very, very excited to offer to you today an exclusive interview with Joe Kosmo. I'm very, very pleased. Joe comes from a long history. Grew up in Pennsylvania, went to college at Penn State, and has spent the last 50 years with NASA. And need I say no more? But he's going to be talking to us today, kind of his farewell, since, as you all know, he's retiring at the end of the month. And he graciously volunteered to share a few of his farewell thoughts and advice to us before he goes, to the spacesuit community only. And we are very privileged today to have his successor be his interviewer, Amy Ross. And
No pressure. No pressure.
As you all well know, Amy came in to succeed Joe 15 years ago because they told her that Joe was nearing his retirement. And so, yeah.
Slower.
And so Amy comes to us with a superb background as well. I mean, it's just awesome. She has a bachelor's and master's from Purdue University in Mechanical Engineering, and she has a master's as well in space studies from University of North Dakota, which is also given her the education to spend the last 15 years studying the spacesuit, being the spacesuit expert along with Joe. And she's done crew escape, she's done gloves, you name it. She knows about the suit, and what other better person to follow in Joe's footsteps. So today, I've asked Amy to interview Joe, and I've asked him a few guided questions. But it's up to them what they share with you today. It's up to Joe what he chooses to share with us. And I just want to have you guys give them both a warm welcome today. Thanks.
Well, let me say something. Cinda's been on my case for a long time about talking and giving lessons learned. I said, what can I tell you all? You all are pretty smart and you know everything, so I can't really tell you very much. But she said, well, why don't we just talk a little bit in generalities about life in general and some perspective of things. I had put together a number of different presentations which she didn't feel were quite appropriate at this point in time regarding innovation and how we did things. And I said, maybe we'll leave that for a later date. So today is kind of an open forum, and guy, you know, who's this guy that's sitting up there, this old guy that's been here for so damn long? So, did you want to lead off with some kind of a question? I didn't want to preempt your...
I knew my job was just keep talking, Joe. Keep talking, Joe. So, Cinda wanted us to start out with some of your pre-NASA background. Tell us how you got to NASA, and then we can talk about NASA. So, what was Joe Kosmo the kid like?
Yeah, Cinda just sent this to me about 2 or 3 minutes ago before I came over here. So these are some general questions. It says, what was it like being Joe Kosmo the kid? Well, you got to go back 70-some years. I was born in 1939 at the end of the Depression. And of course, you know, people didn't have very much back then. There certainly weren't any electronics, and our entertainment was mostly getting out and doing things on our own or with other kids. There was no organized sports. It was all sandlot. So you kind of worked with your peers and you established your relationship with your peers. Everything nowadays is pretty much orchestrated by adults, and all the kids are winners. Everybody gets a trophy. Well, in our day and age, it wasn't that way. So we started off, you know, kind of hard Scrabble. I developed an interest in science when I was young. I don't know, maybe it was just ingrained in me. I was always fascinated by the stars and the universe in general. And my brother and I would earn money mowing yards, and I was making $1/4 a yard, 25 cents a yard, and sometimes I had to mow the yard because my dad said, Mrs. Evans down the street needs her yard mowed and don't take any money. So we collected our money over a period of time. We found a telescope for $44, and so that kind of opened our eyes to the universe, and it was really fascinating. early days, basically, there wasn't any science. It was all science fiction. There wasn't any space program. The earliest I can remember, at the end of the war, we had the German paperclip scientist, von Braun and his team out at White Sands doing launchings, and that always fascinated me. I was really getting interested into rockets and aviation. Of course, the Second World War, I had an opportunity to see an awful lot of aircraft fly over the house, and a lot of the pilots from the neighborhood would do impromptu air shows by buzzing the rooftops and getting you really excited. And so it developed my interest in aviation and space. I guess as time went on, I saved up money to take flying lessons, and things were a little looser back then. You didn't need parental consent to do things. So I went to my family doctor and got a physical, and he said, "What do you need it for?" I said, "Well, I want to take flying lessons." And he said, "Oh, okay." He didn't ask you if my parents were supporting this or not. So
How old were you?
I was probably about 17 at the time, going on 18. Of course, even back then you needed parental consent to do a few things in that regard for aviation. So I started taking flying lessons up at the local airport, and that was a lot. That was pretty expensive. That was $8 an hour for an instructor in a J3 Cub. So it took me a while to collect enough money to get that. But I became even more fascinated with flying. And of course, I started thinking about college and taking engineering. And the school I was going to was a junior college at first, and they had an agreement with Lehigh University. I was thinking along the lines of mechanical engineering, and I remember my dad and I going down there to visit the school, and it was a Gothic setting. It was in this old steel mill town, Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, and it just hit me cold. I just didn't feel like I wanted to be
way
there.
up on a hill.
Yeah, it was on a hill, and you can see the smog from the steel plant and everything, and it just left me cold. And so I came back and I asked a friend of mine. I said, "Where are you going to go to school?" He said, "I'm going to go to Penn State." I said, "Oh, Penn State? Where is that?" I've never been there. He said, "It's in the middle of Pennsylvania." He said, "A nice setting. It's in a kind of a rural setting area." And essentially, he's going to be taking mechanical engineering. So I said, well, I sent a note out to get some application form, and I got the application form back, information on Penn State. And I decided to take aeronautical engineering because I had that interest in flying in space. So I ended up in Penn State and graduated there. They also ask about the most influential person in my life. I don't know if there's any one person. I think I was influenced by a number of people throughout life, and you learn from your elders. Like I said, I was born at the end of the Depression, and there were gentlemen in my neighborhood, and I remember sitting on the porch and listening to their stories. This one man was 4 years old when Custer was massacred, and the other fellow there, his brother built or was working on the building of the Panama Canal.
Jeez.
I had another friend of my dad's who was in the cavalry chasing Pancho Villa down on the border at the turn of the century. There was another fellow that rode with the Rough Riders with Teddy Roosevelt. So I had a variety of people that were fascinating. And you kind of get inspired and learn by all their experiences in life. And so it kind of, strives you into try to do things, to accomplish things. The other thing that didn't influence me at all until, I guess, probably in the much later in my life, was television. We didn't have television. We didn't have television until I was a teenager. In fact, I came home from school one day, and I saw this crowd gathered around my house in ladders, and two guys up on the roof. And one guy's yelling down, "Hey, you see anything yet?" And they're trying to get a signal, taking this antenna and trying to line it up. And then, of course, TV, I think, changed everybody's life. I remember, the folks used to sit on the porch and we'd converse, or they would tell stories, or the big entertainment was listening to radio. When TV came, everybody just kind of got focused on the idiot tube, you know, and I think it's progressed even worse nowadays. I see my grandkids, I mean, we can take them to dinner and they're out there twixing and twittering and, oh, hey, Grandpa, look at this, you know. So, you know, we were more focused on other things and on individuals, on people and conversing. And I'm still that kind of a one-on-one person. I don't really like the computer. It's a wonderful tool, but something that I learned to live without until it's kind of forced into your life. And I still believe that to really deal with people, you have to have face-to-face contact.
That's one of the things you've always mentored as well.
Yeah,
Really
and
get
I really
something
like to
done.
emphasize that. I don't know, and you've all probably experienced the same thing I did. We may be getting a little bit off the chronological aspect, but I'm just going to kind of ramble on here and then kick me back on course. But we've all experienced this string of emails. Good Lord, I don't know, I had one string of emails, I think it was 22 emails long, and it was a topic that we could solve in 5 minutes. And I finally got to the point I was tired of hearing it, so I picked up the phone, called the initiator and said, hey, look it, here's what we're going to have to do on that. And sure enough, we got it resolved. And I think what you ought to do, my advice, is to stand back from the computer a little bit, make eye contact and physical contact, and have a rapport with people that you can converse and relay your experiences and your needs, so you're not carrying on this elaborate communication by electronics.
I think that serves you well too, because you know people all over site, and you can call them up and get all kinds of things done.
You get more done, I believe. And the other thing is, and this is advice to management. I don't know if there's any managers in here. I like to think we have some leaders and not really managers. Everybody can manage something. A leader is another type of a person. You manage by wandering. So you get out of the office and go down and talk to the technicians and get to understand who they are, what their needs are, what their desires are, what their problems are. I mean, we've had people, and I'm sure you've experienced the same thing, where you've been texting folks and they're 2 doors down or 1 door down. Well, get up and talk to the person. Get something resolved, or pick up the phone and call. And so this wonderful electronic world makes it so easy. That's a little bit of my venting on the electronic world. You know, and I reflect back to, you know, I don't want to belabor this aspect, but when we started at NASA, we didn't have computers. We had slide rules and people, and we had discussions that were very technical in nature, and you know, you didn't have a meeting just to have a meeting or to have a status. You had a meeting for a purpose. So the computer is a wonderful tool, but don't let it run and control your life.
So you did interfaces and systems engineering by knowing who the person was working on that thing that you needed to plug into or attach to, or
and you know, work that discipline as such.
how'd you get to NASA?
Oh, how did I get to NASA? Well, you know, that's interesting, because I studied aeronautical engineering, and I majored in propulsion and structures. And I had applied to the Lewis Research Center, which is now Glenn Research Center up in Cleveland, and they had no openings. So in that day and age, they forwarded down to Langley, and I'm looking for a job, obviously. So I get a call at the house one day from a fellow by the name, I really believe his name is Jack Carroll. It stuck in my mind for all these years. And he called and he says, hi, Joe, this is Jack Carroll from Langley. He says, I know you haven't applied down here. He said, but Lewis Research Center sent your resume down, and we're wondering if you might be interested in a job with us. And I said, well, what do you folks do? He says, well, we're going to be working on life support systems and spacesuits, whatever they are. That's what he said, whatever they are. And he says, does it sound interesting? I said, yeah, it sounds interesting. I said, but, you know, my educational background is in, you know, in aeronautical engineering and propulsion and structures. I said, I don't know anything about spacesuits. And he kind of laughed and he said, well, no one else does either, and we're all going to learn. And then he says, does it sound interesting to you? I said, oh, yeah, well, definitely, I'm going to take a job, you know. I'll learn. Then he says, oh, by the way, we're going to be moving from Langley to Texas. He says, does that change your mind? Now, here I'm a kid growing up in the East. I love the old cowboys, you know, because when I grew up, I mean, that's who some of my idols were, the old Western cowboys. And I saw all this wonderful scenery with the mountains and deserts. And I used to like to collect rocks, and oh, no, that's great, you know. So I signed on with NASA up at Langley. In fact, I signed on, it was the original Space Task Group. And that was the, you know, it was like the, well, we had Max Faget, and we had Chris Kraft, and we had Robert Gilruth, and, you know, all the early guys in the program there. They were the founders of really the Space Task Group. So it was quite an interesting endeavor there. Then I got to Texas. So
did you drove down and reported at Langley? And was
yeah, I stayed at Langley. I worked at Langley for about a month, and I got my orders to go to Houston. The reason I probably got my orders before some other folks, because I was a single guy. I was like 22 years old. There was a lot of family folks there, and they had to sell homes and get their kids all squared away. So they said, you go on down to Texas. And they gave me a 4 3/4 days to get to Texas. You'd be surprised what you find in your desk when you're cleaning out after 50 years. I actually found my orders to come down here, believe it or not. Not electronically. This is all hard copy file. So they gave me 4 3/4 days to get down here. Now my per diem was horrendous. Man, it was $16 a day. That was what my per diem was. Now, I got down here in 4.5 days, and my total voucher reimbursement was $248. Now that's like $55 a day, and that got my gas, 3 square meals a day, and my motel. So you can see how times have changed. But that was an experience coming down in itself. You know, I'm still looking for those mountains and desert. And I got into Lufkin. I see all these piney woods, and that was a day and age when they would actually, you know, fill your tires with air and wash your windshield while they're pumping gas. And I'm sitting in the car, and you got to understand the little car I had was a Bug-Eye Sprite, 1961 Bug-Eye Sprite, with all my worldly possessions in there and $300 that my dad had given me. That's what I had to the world, and a job. But anyway, I get into Lufkin, and the guy's cleaning the windshield, and I asked him, I said, say, where is the mountains in the desert? And he looks at me and he starts laughing. He says, son, he says, you got to go 600-800 miles further west before you do that, before you see those. He said, where are you going? I said, to Houston. He said, well, there ain't no mountains down there. Well, he was right. I kept getting out of the piney woods and coming down to Houston, and it's getting hotter. Now, this is in January. I left Langley in December the 29th. I got here on January the 2nd. And it was hot and humid. When I left Langley, we had about 10 inches of snow, and I'm down here sweating, you know, and I thought, holy cow, this is going to be something else. And what an experience this is going to be.
A lot of people thought that coming to Houston.
and Houston was much different in that day and age. It was really a small town. Well, small. It was probably around 600,000 people. And they still had the small town atmosphere. It was really an interesting place. And here, you wouldn't believe what NASA looked like. You know, it'd be better visually if I had all my view graphs and charts and slides that would show that. But
if you go over to Building 2, you can see some of those old pictures. At least they.
Yeah, I mean, you know, you can see those.
Some of the original Space Task Group buildings.
So,
in town.
The end of town basically was, you know, I don't know if y'all know where Gulfgate is, where the Gulfgate Shopping Center is. That was the end of town, literally. And I've got a picture from, there was an overpass over, it wasn't even Interstate 45, it was Highway 75. But if you look down towards the south, there's nothing. absolutely nothing. And if you drive down here, which I did, there's absolutely nothing here
Nothing.
but between Webster and Seabrook. I mean, I couldn't believe why we were here to begin with. So my first job was working with the Corps of Engineers to try to set the facilities up. So basically, I saw all this being built and had arguments and discussions about what we should do here in the facilities and all. So I saw it from the ground up, literally. So it was really an interesting aspect from that standpoint.
And you had buildings in town, right?
Yeah, when we were in, when we first got to Houston, we were spread all over. The Crew and Thermal System Division, our division, was housed in Lane Wells Building on Wayside Drive, and we had a good group of folks down there. When I hired on at Langley, there were only about 10 people in our division, and I'd like to recommend for every one of you, if you have an opportunity to try to read the oral history of Dick Johnson. He was basically the founder of our division. I mean, a straight shooter guy. He was very technically competent, and he told it the way it was. I always liked Dick. He'd say, yeah, how'd your week go, Dick, or how'd the month go? Well, not too bad. I didn't have to fire anybody this month. And that was the day and age when they got rid of a lot of people, too. So read it. Please read it. I think it'll help establish the legacy of what we're trying to leave behind and understand who some of the founders were. I think that's very important, too. I come from a background of tradition and discipline, and I saw that through the program as we went through the different programs.
Is that partly because a lot of these folks have been through World War II?
Yeah, it has a lot to do with generation, and I had a whole discussion. I'd like to talk about innovation brings results and why things are done at a point in time. But, you know, you bring that up, and I think the generation and the culture has a lot to do the way we do things. You know, Cinna has been on my case about how we do things, you know, and try to give lessons learned. I said, well, you know, I don't want to waste your time and waste my time. I could tell you how we did things, but you can't do them that way anymore. I mean, that's life. It has changed.
HR would be all over these guys.
Yeah, there's a lot of political correctness now, and the program, the nature of the program was much different back in Apollo. It was almost like being in a paramilitary organization. It was very disciplined. In fact, my late wife used to always ask me when she saw photos of me, why aren't you smiling? I said, I was told not to smile. This is serious business. I mean, everything was really very regimented. But our leaders, and that's what I call them, when I look back in the early days of Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo, as you mentioned, Amy, too, the folks that really were the leaders had the experience in life of making decisions, you know, life decisions. I mean, first off, I happened to be born at the end of the Depression. Well, most of these guys were born at the early part of the Depression or just before the Depression. So they learned how to do things with their hands. They learned how to get along and coexist. Probably some of them were in the Civilian Conservation Corps. So, you know, things were pretty tough then. And then all of a sudden, these young men were thrust into the war, the Second World War. And they're given awesome responsibility of flying high-performance aircraft. 19 and 20 years old. I've met some of these gentlemen. And it's really an honor, and they get very humbled about their experience and the responsibilities that were thrust on their shoulders. I had one pilot of a B-24 that I happened to fly on. You know, I asked him how old he was when he flew. He said, well, that plane you just flew on, he says, I was 19 years old. I was commander of this. I had 10 men in my group, and he said some of them were in their 30s. They took orders from me, and he said, thank God, I brought them all back alive after every mission. And so there's an awesome bit of responsibility we're thrust on these guys' shoulders. Well, obviously, when they came back from the war, they furthered their education. They got degrees in engineering and business and whatever else they got. But they still carry this mindset of this discipline that they had and the understanding of risk. And I saw that through the program, through the Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo program. There were decisions made. I mean, some of the times I might have had a report that had three pages on there. They'd read the report, that was their recommendation, and that's the way they would go, or they would say, okay, that's your recommendation, but what other options did you look at? Any big trade studies? You know, I think if we did a lot of trade studies back in Apollo in those days, we'd probably scare ourselves. We'd probably not gone to the moon at all. But these folks are ready to make decisions. They understood what the risk factor was, and then they made some damn good decisions. It's evidenced by the fact that they inspired a lot of you folks, I guess, to follow the course and do the things you're doing. We don't have that. We don't have that environment anymore. I'd like to see the culture readapt to that. And talking about culture, too, I think even the agency's culture has changed over the generation. I was thinking this morning, I didn't know what you were going to ask me, so I was just kind of putting some thoughts together. I put a little U.S. human spaceflight chronology list together. I was thinking back on the programs that we had. And I'm just going to kind of give you a little overview on this. We had the Mercury program. That lasted 1 year and 8 months. Then we went to the Gemini program. That was 2 years. We had the Apollo program. That actually lasted 3 years and 4 months. Skylab, an 8-month program. And Apollo-Soyuz was 1 flight. So we had 5 major human spaceflight programs in a period of 14 years. The agency back then was more R&D oriented. So you had this fast pace. You didn't have these empires being built up over a period of time. Now let me give you a perspective. Shuttle, 30 years. Space station, been 13 years. So we've had 2 major human spaceflight programs in 30 years, and that's probably what I see here. I look at a generation of folks that probably hired in after we've developed the shuttle program, and you've taken over and done a wonderful job of operating it. But in that period of time, the philosophy and the culture of the agency has changed. It became more from an R&D to more of a flight ops. Not to take any swings at the flight ops folks, but and I'm looking at Ernie back there, a good friend of mine. But you can understand that the culture changed in that regard too. Now the downside of that, not only from the culture change and looking at how we emphasize our focus, the technology money that we once had that enabled us to do things thinking out of the box dried up. A lot of our technology money was directed to support program. So if you weren't doing technology to support that particular program, they weren't interested.
Yeah. You got really creative about how you sold certain hardware developments.
Oh yes, yeah, you had to kind of, you know,
the Mark III's a microgravity suit.
Right, you had
lots of lower torso mobility.
Yeah, and even, you know, the agency is structured differently. We had a funding organization in the early days of the agency called the OART, Office of Advanced Technology and Research. And it wasn't controlled by any program. It was just more or less, they came and asked you what you thought you ought to be doing. How do you think you need to improve this area? What would you do? You know, how much funding do you think you might need? They didn't structure you into saying, hey, you know, the program technology focuses in this area and you better be working in this area. If you had some ideas out of the box and you got your sponsor up there to understand what you're doing, you'd get sponsored to do it. And so physically, I had the opportunity to investigate a number of different concepts on suits and gloves that wasn't being manipulated or restricted or controlled by some management level saying, no, we want you to focus on that.
What time frame was that, the mid to late 60s?
Yeah, it was, well, I look back and it actually started in the early 60s.
Okay.
Because even management back then didn't know how we're going to get to the moon, and so they were looking at various technological options that essentially would give us an out in case we had a problem. And I remember the ILC and Ham Standard folks were having a problem with the ILC suit at the time. My division chief, Dick Johnson, took me up to headquarters, and at that time I was working on the RX series hard suit. And Jim Webb, he was up there, and he told Jim Webb, he said, here is the backup to the Apollo suit in case it doesn't work. Well, in actuality, it was more of a sharp stick into the contractor saying, hey, you know, if you guys don't get online, we got another suit here that's warming up. But by the same token, they allowed you to develop this technology, to work the technology, and it was more the teamwork that I had with folks. I had the opportunity to get with who I thought was the best group to work with, and we've worked across the board with ILC and Litton Industries and Air Research at the time and David Clark Company.
Yeah, how many different companies were there working on suits?
You know, I look back at that, and there were about 15 companies. There was Arrowhead, and I don't remember all the names of the company. I had them listed there, but there were like 15 companies, and now, you know, we're boiled down to about 2 or 3, really. And it wasn't the fact that, you know, they're not good companies, but the competition was pretty stiff. And that was the nice thing about it, too. When you have competition, you get a lot of innovative folks. So the innovation comes from the competitive nature of the business. So we had the opportunity to do that, but, you know, and you experienced this, too, how our technology money had dried up over the period of time between, I guess it was starting in the, well, what's interesting, starting in the early 90s.
Yeah, that's when I came
There's
in.
another chart I put together at one time. I did a parody on Mike Lawson when he retired. I had this little parody of his life and his accomplishments, and one of them I had this chart, and I think people took it wrong. I think it wasn't so much a negative about Mike, about all the problems. It was the fact that it was a reflection of the problems we have with the agency. And I can see some smiley faces here, too, because they've all experienced the same thing. But I had put this little chart together. It's called the Advanced Project Funding, a 21-year history overview on how we started and stopped programs. And it's unfortunate. Had we stayed the course with any one of these, we would have been greatly ahead. Can I tick through a few of these, or do we have time to tick? Or?
Yeah, I remember I worked on one spacesuit development project that lasted a week.
Yeah, yeah. Here it is, the SEI. That was our first lunar outpost. We're going to start this program.
That one too.
You remember that one? Hey,
Sure
bring
did.
back old memories. Well, this was by President Bush 1. You know, he was going to go back to the moon and on to Mars.
We were sitting in a conference room, and they said, "Okay, funding's gone. Everybody leave. Don't charge anymore."
Yep. That went
So
from
then
90 to 92. The status was canceled, the office disbanded. Then the next thing is we got turned on to this Fast Track Zero G EMU 93. This came from Code R in NASA headquarters. That program was canceled. Then we had the Common EMU program that we were playing with the Russians. That was in 93 also. This was driven by NASA and the Space Station office. That was canceled. Then we had the X-Suit project, 93 to 94. That was the Code U headquarters purple team. Cab Calloway running that one. Got canceled.
The big one I was going to work on.
The Next Generation EMU. Anyone getting tired yet? I'm already about a third of the way through, folks. 1995. This is NASA headquarters, Office of the Chief Engineer, John Coward. That was canceled. Oh, then we had Dan Golan, the human lunar return to the moon, 1995 to 96. It was an in-house study, but then in the mid-course, we shifted our emphasis to Mars. Then we put it on hold. Then it became Destination Mars in 1996. That was the NASA JSC Human Lunar Return Team, reformatted. But then, now get this, the national space policy changed that we're going to have robots on Mars by 2000. And bottom line, this one, human exploration and unknown. I mean, it was very dubious about what human exploration was going to be. And this was basically a question that we all had in our mind in 96. But then in 97 and 98, we had the Advanced Spacesuit Project. That was a combined Code U and Code M at headquarters. And then we had the project office involved in that as well. Funding was embargoed. Remember that? Mm-hmm. Only a portion released, and we never did anything with it. It just kind of dried up. Then we had a bunch of advanced EVA technologies in our mind here in '99. That was from Code M at headquarters, but there weren't any FY '99 funds planned. So we had a lot of stuff on paper, but no one had any money. Then we had the Space Launch Initiative, and that was a second generation launch vehicle. That was Code M in 2001, 2000.
Source board for that.
You were in source board for that one. That was canceled. And then we have the Constellation spacesuit, lunar surface suit that we started in 2004 to 2006. And that was all spun up through the Constellation Program Office, but there was zero funding in FY '07 and subsequent years. And then the Constellation Program itself was canceled in 2010. Now we've got the Flexible Path Human Exploration Program, which I call a work in progress. So that's kind of part of the problem. We don't stay focused. We need a focused goal. Now, all these elements were supposed to be focused, but obviously they weren't focused enough because they didn't get the support. But had we stayed on any one of these tracks, we probably would have been a lot further along.
One of the things that always impressed me was how you were able to maintain a vision of what needed done and scrape up the little fall off the table scraps from the shuttle and station programs to still make something happen. How did you do that?
Well, it's you have to do a lot of marketing, and you have to work with people. Again, you have to work with people. You don't send them emails. You got to go around and talk to people. And you do what you think is right for the vision. I mean, you know, we're supposed to be exploring beyond low Earth orbit. But all the technologies that we've been doing have been pretty much focused on low Earth orbit. Like I mentioned earlier, all our technologies have been pretty much driven by the needs of the program. And we've kept this operations going for all these years. We haven't been able to operate beyond that. But like I say, it's a change in the culture. It's the way things are done, the way the generations bring their reflections to the table in regard to how they see programs being orchestrated and directed. But I thought back in the early 90s, and this is 97, after the demise of some of our lunar program activities, especially when we had the SEI program, that we need to start training young people for exploration beyond low Earth. And that's when I started Desert Rats, thinking that, you know, at least we get some fundamental things going. We didn't have much money, obviously, to do it. You know, it was just kind of a hard scrabble, pull things together. But you find other folks, too, that are in the same situation. They don't have much money, but they've got the interest. So collectively, you build this team together, and you'd be surprised what a team of folks can do. They can contribute quite a bit. So my role was more like trying to orchestrate who I thought the best players of the orchestra were, and you know, they did a wonderful job. And I believe that you know, that holds true with a number of folks here. I look around and I recognize a lot of faces and understand what you've been doing, and you know, worked with you over these years, and you know, there's still a great future out there. But it's the ideas come from grassroots level. Don't wait for somebody at headquarters to give you an idea. Hell, they don't know what the hell's going on. You know, it's the people here that are, you know, in the trenches doing the work. That's what bubbles up to the surface, and then you let them believe it became their idea, and then they support it. So I mean, that's kind of like in a nutshell, but it takes a lot of endurance and a lot of work on everybody's part to make something happen like that.
Yeah. Well, just like the rock pile, your persistence is also a good lesson, because that took a decade.
Yeah.
To get built.
Yeah.
And now it's 3 times the size it was.
Well, again, you
You plant the seed.
You plant the seed, exactly. Yeah. You plant the seed and see how the tree grows. And it's fundamentally it. I mean, I'm sure y'all have some good innovative ideas and you'd like to be able to exercise it. And I got a kick out of just the past. I mean, it's just like a bureaucracy. They're legislating innovativeness now. They're directing to be innovative. Well, you know, you have to have the environment conducive to be
And yet they're creating more processes and rules
right,
at the same
yeah.
time.
Oh yes, yes. That's a whole other aspect. That's a whole new story. I'm going to talk about the innovativeness at some point in time. But yeah, they're kind of restrictive in that sense. Yeah, follow the procedures.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm wandering again, but you know, in my ramblings here and looking at information, and I collect a lot of thoughts over the years, and this is probably not just my words, but these are words that came from the NASA alumni group, and I'm talking about old graybeards like myself, or maybe even older, if they're still around. This was a topic, and I like this, and let me just read this to you and absorb some of this. Where did the old NASA innovative spirit go? When we first got started, we were an excited, barnstorming bunch. Our technology was new, and we made lots of mistakes. But through sheer dedication, common sense, and the excitement of doing something that no one had ever done before, we accomplished a great deal. This gave us a good commodity called experience. Then someone said, let's write our experiences down so we won't make any mistakes. So we wrote reports to each other and documented our achievements and results. This took time from our design work, but dedication, common sense, and inspiration from our leaders pulled us through to accomplish more good, innovative results. It also gave us more experience, and someone said, let's codify our experience into formal manuals and procedures so we don't make any mistakes and eliminate risk and teach others. So we did. Eventually, micromanagement, program pressure, and milestone deadline demand put us on a grueling commitment schedule that reading the massive manuals and procedures, let alone try to fully understand them, took so much time from actual design, development, and testing work that something had to go. The thing that was innovative, the thing that went was innovative spirit. With procedures and rules to guide every step, who needed inspiration? But when the spirit went, so did the dedication and common sense. This precipitated even developing more procedures, rules, and regulations, and all thoughts of imagination, technical excellence, accountability, responsibility, and personal contribution were buried in a bitter, deadly serious game of follow the procedures. As the procedures, rules, and regulations burdened, they became even harder to follow, and eventually required so many review cycles, checklists, signatures, and approvals that eventually the risk to be innovative ground to a halt. No one could move without violating some procedure, rule, or regulation. That's kind of a simplified factor.
So now you just totally brought this way down to the bottom, depressed all of us.
Well, no. You have the opportunity.
Yeah. What do we do?
You have to influence a change in the culture, and I see that happening. Everybody was down in the dumps at the end of the shuttle program. You know, well, obviously you've been working on the program for 30 years. Your job is winding down. But if you look at it, you take a lemon, make lemonade out of it, David. Right now, you're probably going to have freedom of thought and freedom of action. No one has got a big program hanging over your head to push on you. So this is the time to be innovative. This is the time to really start thinking out of the box. Now, unfortunately, and I've seen some of this scrambling for the AES funding, I never saw so much politicking and bureaucracy being brought to bear for $3 million. But I think the cycle is being broken to some degree. I'd like to think that the culture is going to change to allow you guys to really think out of the box. And you really need to do that, because that's where the innovation comes into play. So I'm just kind of setting a little stage on how we see things holding innovation down, but by the same token, I see there's an opportunity to be very innovative in the fact that a big program isn't hanging over your head as such, driving you by these scheduled dates.
Yeah, we seemed to have a lot of fun when there wasn't anybody checking our milestones because they weren't giving us a whole lot of money, so we were under the radar. and you know, you didn't get to do big things, but you could do fun things. And start from cardboard and move to wood and move to aluminum and
Yeah, and
just
you
do
know,
something, learn something.
it's easier to have those kind of mock-ups fail than an operational system, you know, and that's part of the whole process too. In fact, I could talk about that in a whole separate discussion. But you talk about the radar screen too. That was kind of interesting, even with desert rats. After I had been working desert rats for a number of years, I called me up to headquarters and asked for a briefing on desert rats, and I went into the room. I was late getting there, and the room was pretty full, and there was a guy sitting at the head of the table, and there was a chair empty next to him. He said, "Oh, sit over here." I didn't know who the fellow was. And then someone was giving a presentation, and he leans over to me. He says, "Hey, Joe," he says, "I'm Jim Garvin." You know, I didn't know who he was, even when he gave me his name. Then I later found out he was the chief scientist at NASA. That's how dumb I was about the bureaucracy. And he says, "You've been doing desert rats under the radar screen for some years, haven't you?" I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "Well, you've been doing pretty good." Then he says, "We're going to put you above the radar screen." He said, "But I'm not so sure you're going to like all the help you're going to get." So he understood what the bureaucracy aspect was too. But if you don't have a lot of pressure from a program, a big flight program, you'll have the opportunities to be innovative. You know, Rob is working on the suit port concept here and doing great work on that. And Barbara's now handling the analog management, and you're doing technology studies, and hopefully you'll be able to think out of the box too with your technology studies. But focusing further out, looking at what are we going to do beyond low Earth orbit. You know, I had the opportunity a couple of weeks ago to run into Mike Griffin and talk to him. I told him how much I appreciated working with him and for him over these years. I just frankly said, "You know, Mike, the path we're on now, this flexible path, isn't going to get us anywhere." And I must have pushed his button, because then he started telling me of all the problems he had at headquarters on trying. And he was in much the agreement that we have to have a focused goal. We need a focused goal. I don't care what you're doing in life. You have to have a focused goal on something to accomplish anything. You know, we ran a program this past year in exploring asteroids, and I could see there was some level of varying degree of interest, you know, even from the science community. The planetary scientist folks, tongue-in-cheek, would go along with it, but they'd rather be going back to the moon and then thinking about going to Mars. And I think in prospect of what we're intending to do, if we look at our vision, I look at what we did on Apollo. You know, and I heard the president's comment about, well, we've been to the moon, we don't need to go back. There's no need to go back. Well, that's like going downtown Houston, spending 2 hours down there, coming back and say, "I've seen it all," you know. If you look at what we did on Apollo, you know, the landings and the time we spent on the Apollo, on the surface of the moon, we actually spent 82 hours of EVA time on the moon. You know, give or take a few minutes after that, I guess. And we only traveled about 60 miles. So now you're going to tell me we know all about the moon? Well, you know, I can't see how we're going to even talk about going to Mars or even asteroids and long-duration flights unless we go back and reestablish some level of experience. So you folks have got the experience on that kind of exploration. So I'm thinking, you know, we focus our attention on going back to the moon, establishing that. And I don't mean a big architectural structure.
You don't want to get stuck there.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen some of these studies, you know, and everybody's against putting flags and footprints on the moon again. They have these horrendous architectural elements there, and it costs billions and billions of dollars. But hey, we need to get back and get our feet wet again, or our feet dirty at least. You know, start and learn some of these things. Then we're better prepared to go for these longer-term missions out thinking about asteroids and Mars.
So let me ask a different question. What was one of your favorite experiences in a spacesuit?
Well, the one I reflect on, I had the opportunity to demonstrate the prototype Apollo suit for President Kennedy. And that was kind of, I guess, being a 22-year-old kid, it was a highlight of my career at that point in time, you know. I mean, it was a room about 30 people. And you have to understand, in that day and age, the Apollo program, a lot of the Apollo program was classified secret and confidential. So there weren't a lot of photos that I know of at all existing when that happened, although when he was doing his walkabout over in the Rich building at the mock-ups, you know, they had some pictures of him at the
So was
podium.
that here? He was here when you did that?
Yeah, and if you look way in the back, I'm back there. But anyway, that was an interesting experience. Like I said, you know, in that room there was President Kennedy, there was Senator Humphrey, there was Lyndon B. Johnson, there was Wernher von Braun. I mean, and what was his name? He was the head of the Strategic Air Command. Curtis LeMay, General Curtis LeMay, and there was a whole bunch of folks there, and I was the lowest ranking person, next to the janitor. But the president came in. He was, you know, he's a good-looking guy, 5'11", you know, tan, had a blue shirt on, red tie. Took his coat off. First thing he did is roll up his sleeves, and he had a bad back, so they had a chair, kind of like a rocking chair. He kind of sat there slumped. And, you know, they were giving the presentations, and so my division chief, Dick Johnson, had asked me if I would wear the suit and demonstrate the suit. So I was all suited up there. Dick was giving the presentation. And the president was like maybe where Dave is sitting here, and I'm standing here, and Dick is going through the explanation of the suit, and I'm going through the mobility, and Dick reaches in his pocket, and he pulls out a quarter and throws it on the floor. Now, I never really bent over in this suit before, and I thought I damn well better pick that quarter up. So I picked the quarter up and handed it to the president, and he looks at it, he smiles at me, hands me the quarter back, and I give it to my boss. So I don't know if Dick ever did with that or not. But that was kind of an interesting experience, and then, you know, had the opportunity to be a test subject in the more like a monkey in the can there, in the Mercury suit, and sat in the Mercury capsule for about 16, 17 hours. I was kind of the surrogate to Wally Schirrau's flight. I was a single guy there. I used to have to carry my urine jug around in the trunk of the car, and I had a date, and I'd have to take this. What is that? I said my urine jug. And, well, I did know those dates kind of went fast. You know, that guy's an oddball. Then they bought me this little plastic tub that I had a shower in, and they would collect all the wash water to look at the electrolyte. It was bizarre. Some experiences. Then I was in the Mercury capsule one time, and I'm laying on my back there, and I look over at the window, and there's this guy going. So I go, and after it was over with, I think Joe Schmidt was the tech. I said, "Hey, Joe, who was that fellow that was waving there?" He said, "Oh, you don't know who that was?" I said, "No, I had no idea." He said, "That's Ray Bolger. He was the straw man in the Wizard of Oz." I said, "I didn't know." Yeah, you didn't meet characters all over the place. Yeah.
Because we had a lot of people come through the lab and get in the glove box and even the suit.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Oh, and von Braun, Wernher von Braun claimed I saved his life. Well, it was at the same time when we were doing the demonstration for the president. You know, we all went over to the Rich building. That's where in fact, that's where we were when we did the demonstration. And the Rich building was off on Telephone Road. This was like our tech services. We had the mock-ups there. And they had this stairway that went up to the mock-ups. And everybody went up, the president went up, and I'm standing at the bottom of the stairs there. And von Braun was the last person down, and about the third step from the bottom, he stumbled. And I happened to be standing there, and he falls on me. And he said, "Oh, thank you, young man, you saved my life." So that was my introduction to von Braun. He was always my hero, too, when I was a kid, you know, because I always remember him and the Germans launching these V-2s from White Sands.
Very cool. Tell about when we went to the Smithsonian and how, you know, like Spinney and Jim Edwards and I were seeing hardware, but you saw something different when we were.
Yeah, that was interesting. You know, when I see a piece of hardware like a suit or a glove, I don't see the hardware as much. I see people. not that I see ghosts or anything. I see people that have
Not dead
actually
people.
that actually help contribute to the development. And I reflect on all the meetings we had, all the good times, all the hard times, the arguments we had, and that to me represents a piece of hardware. And I often wonder, you know, when I look at any piece of hardware, I wonder what was the history behind this? Who were the people that really did this? It's the people that really count. I mean, the piece of hardware is physically there, but you know, I often wonder, man, if that piece of hardware could talk, what it would say, you know, what would it tell you? So that's kind of what I reflected on when I saw those suits.
Because one of the things you taught me is that everything on a suit is there for a reason. And so, you know, when I look, it's like, well, what were they thinking when they made that decision? Why is that there, and what were they thinking?
I think it's important, too, because then once you understand the background of that, then it helps you progress to the future as to what you envision that you might need for the future. So.
Now, also to tell a story on Joe real quick, when we were at the Smithsonian, to the ladies there, those are artifacts, and they wear lab coats and like gloves, and Joe's up there picking at it and poking at it and like scraping at something, and they're like freaking
Oh, they got
out.
on my case real quick. I
"Tell
said,
me
well,
why
you
was
know, I'm the one that gave you this. Well, that's all right. It's ours now. I mean,
Other thing was,
slap your hands.
other thing he was looking between two different. They had two different suits laying there. He's like looking back and forth, and well, what's the matter? Well, that lower torso goes with that upper torso, and that lower torso goes with that upper torso. They had it mixed up.
It was interesting.
And they're like, really? They were very, very happy to find that out. That was fun. So what do you, is there any piece of hardware that really sticks out to you? Any design or any?
Well, you know, I kind of favor the Mark III.
A little bit.
A little biased. And that's a history in itself, too. How that came about. To think back, there was a gentleman that was, he was the associate administrator of NASA, Hans Mark. He had actually been a center director out at Ames. And I guess when he was out at Ames, he kept hearing from the Ames folks about, this higher operating pressure suit, you know, blah, 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 blah. He became associate administrator, and so he challenged them to build a higher operating pressure suit. Now, you know, there was a lot of doubt in people's mind because, you know, we had the shuttle suit, and there were people saying 4.3. Boy, that's, you know, we had the Apollo suit with 3.75. Yeah, you know, good Lord, you know, 8.3 psi. You will never make a suit like that. Well, anyway, he had asked Ames to start this program. Well, Ames all of a sudden got a lump in their throat because they're more, and they you know, a lot of people claim they hobby shop, but I think they did a lot of good work too. There was a good guy out there, Vic Ucal, friend of mine, good designer, good suit designer, but he was really focused on a hard suit. You know, he and I had competed against each other even back in the RX series days, and he developed the AX series. So his management, their management from Ames came to JSC, said, hey, you know, we don't know how to really run a suit program. We'd be glad to give design inputs. So, you know, basically, you know, we'd like to have you guys do it. Well, I was involved in the development of the shuttle EMU, and we pretty much had it developed. So Walt Guy, who was my division chief, assigned me to run the higher operating pressure suit program. So I met with the Ames folks, and we worked along pretty good. We had ILC, we had David Clark, we had Hamilton Standard as the integrator, and Ames was supplying a lot of the concepts for the mobility systems because they had been working this idea, and obviously, you know, Hans Mark had poked them and said, okay, you know, do it. Well, we developed a ZPS suit. I don't know if you all remember the ZPS suit. Remember, you ever heard of the ZPS? Zero pre-breathe suit, operated 8 PSI. It looked like the Tin Man suit. It was a combination. It was more of an erector set concept of looking
Like
at different.
an EMU upper torso.
Yeah, to save cost, they used the shuttle torso and the helmet. You know, then we had Clark and ILC building gloves and airlock Airlock built hardware, and of course ILC built most of the joint elements, but the design was provided by Ames primarily. So we ended up having the suit, and your dad was one of the evaluators there, and it came out pretty negative, you know. But even from a negative standpoint, you know, you learn a lot. So don't discount failure. That's another topic of discussion too. Failure is not an option. Well, I have umbrage with that. But anyway, we ended up with the ZPS suit here, and then unbeknownst to us at the time, Ames got funding from DARPA, and they went off and they built the AX5 suit. And we're showcasing this as the panacea, the answer to all suit. So my old management came to me and said, "Hey, Kosmo, what are we going to do about this?" And I said, "Well," I said, "give me some time and money, and we'll build something." And so basically, I had about a year's time, a little over maybe a year's time. I had some money, and I got with some of the guys. And again, it's part of the team. We had some good guys from ILC, great designers. Lou Dickerson was the project engineer, and Mel Case. And I had some ideas from our hard suit days, the RX series. So collectively, put that together. And I'm not talking about writing requirements. I mean, writing requirements is something. I saw the Constellation program writing requirements for 2 years and nothing. You know, everybody, you know, you got to do things before you write requirements to understand what you're doing. You know. Anyway, we had a basic frame of what we wanted, and we built the darn thing, and it came out really pretty darn good. In fact, there was the great swim-off. That was the way the Wall Street Journal called it, between the AX5 and the Mark III suit. And I think your dad was also one of the evaluators. And in fact, you were on the committee to help assess the findings, weren't you, if I remember?
I don't know that I was. I think that was a little bit before me. That might have been Stephanie?
It could have been. That was it. It was Stephanie at the time. Yeah, she was part of that. So we assessed and evaluated both suits with 4 crew members. And it took like about a 2-year evaluation, but very intensive.
I think I saw some of those runs.
Yeah, very intensive analysis and board meetings, discussions. Well, as it turned,
binders worth of.
Turned out the Mark III suit pretty much beat them. The only thing that the AX5 had that we thought might have potential, better potential, was the forebearing shoulder instead of the rolling convolute shoulder. But again, that was another aspect of evaluation where we were looking at hand-over-hand translation in regard to space station, because these suits were kind of vying for a slot on space station, which unfortunately never turned out to be the case of implementation.
They chose to go ahead with the shuttle EMU and do the upgrades.
Yeah, and that,
station requirements.
just a sideline to that is, you know, Bill Lenore, who was heading up the station program, didn't believe there were going to be more than 300 hours of EVA in space station. And then the Fisher-Price study came back and said, oh no, there's going to be 1,500 hours or more, and so it was a big battle. So Lenore went to Congress and told Congress he didn't need any more money, not going to build any advanced spacesuit. Then he calls us up the next week and says, come up and tell me about your spacesuits. So we went up there, we talked about the Mark III, the AX5, and the shuttle suit. And so we're sitting in a room there ready to give him the presentation on that. He walked in the room, he says, well, gentlemen, he says, I've already made my decision. We're not going to be building any advanced suits, but let me hear your technology. I thought we ought to just fold our case and go home, you know. So it never did evolve into a suit for space station, but we did end up using the suit as a technology demonstrator for planetary surface operations, thinking ahead again, thinking out of the box, thinking that at some point in time we're going to be doing some beyond low Earth orbit activities. And it became a very good basis for looking and understanding mobility requirements. Albeit it was heavier than what we needed. Obviously, it was designed for 8.3, and you know, we never really had the technology money to really do weight reduction. I mean, again, that was part of the problem. You know, we had ideas in mind, but we couldn't get any sponsorship to fund us to reduce the weight, because we could have gotten that weight down significantly. So that's where the flexibility and the innovativeness need to play together with the funding, and have somebody that's in a leadership role to understand the needs and push it in that direction.
Priscilla, Mark III has been our premier mobility platform for 15 years, 20 years?
It's over.
20 years.
In fact, it was delivered in February of 1988, so it's about, what, 22 years, 23?
Don't
Still,
do math.
I don't know. It's still trucking along pretty good.
Yep. Okay. Let's see.
How are we time-wise?
We're doing okay. We've got about 20 minutes left. So figure we'd chat on for a little bit longer and then have to take a few questions.
Sure.
Okay. Advice. Do you have any consolidated thoughts on advice for us folks left stick around doing the job as you go off and have fun?
Oh, well, I kind of rambled around, bits and pieces here and there. I think it's incumbent upon you folks to become the leaders, obviously, and influence the community to change things. Don't just accept things because someone tells you to do it this way or that's the way it's being done. I mean, challenge it. You got to take a look and see what you think is right. Like I say, you can't put all things in requirements or in procedures or regulations and controlled procedures. You have to rely on people. People have to know what they're doing. You have to kind of understand what you're doing and then understand other folks in their activities and basically watch each other's back in that regard. You just can't fall back on the fact that some requirement tells you to do this or tells you not to do that. I don't know. Part of the agency and culture needs to change, and it's you folks that have to do the changing.
Okay. Let's see. So as far as you're forward-looking, what would you say we ought to spend some emphasis on for the future on spacesuit design?
Well, simplicity and robustness. That's kind of the key element. When we're talking about the vision that we have beyond low Earth orbit, and when we're going to the moon and staying there for extended periods of time and then eventually going on to Mars, you're not going to have a depot to come back to and get things fixed. We were fortunate with the shuttle program. For 30 years, you'd fly. You knew you were going to be up there for X period of time, but you're going to bring it all back, and you could refurbish things.
Have a team of technicians.
Have a team,
Go over it with a fine
it's like
yeah.
like your Formula car. You do a number of laps, run in there, and they change the engine out or whatever else they're going to do. It's not going to be that way in the future. So you have to make things that are fairly simple and robust, so that the crew has the autonomy to do whatever they need to do to keep things going. So that's kind of in a very basic nutshell. And I've looked at I looked at all the different mobility systems we developed over the years, and some of them looked like fine Swiss watches versus something that's more robust like a Ford, And I would suggest you do the Ford as opposed to the Swiss watch type approach. You could build these sophisticated mobility joints, but then again, you have all these problems associated with it. So again, it's simplicity and robustness. And that goes for all systems, not just a suit.
I think we've also agreed that building a system that has a lot of operational flexibility and capability in it, more than what might be demanded by the limited thought at the beginning about what tasks might or might not need to be performed.
Yeah, but you have to caution it. Just because you can do it, don't do it. Don't add too much to it. Don't add the bells and whistles. You want something that's basic and necessary. And then as it progresses, as you learn more about it, then you may want to enhance it. But don't start off and say, oh yeah, well we can do this and this just because you can do it, or because the technology exists to do it. You got to be careful on what you introduced into the design.
Yeah, but I meant having more than one maybe mobility path to walk or fall recovery.
Oh, yeah, I mean, more of an option.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. That kind of thing. Okay, I think we're going to go ahead and open it up for some questions. And I'll try to repeat the question so it's on the mic if there aren't mics in here.
Giving a little bit of, maybe a little too much credit for Congress, I believe we have a bunch of well-intentioned congressmen that, left to their own devices, are going to try to grab whatever they can for their people, and it seems to be in my mind, a lack of leadership from NASA to be able to convey a vision and what we need to achieve that vision to Congress. Do you think that it actually is possible that the only real answer that we're ever going to come to is bringing NASA back under the DoD?
I would hope not. I mean, just to bring it under DoD for leadership?
Yes.
No, I think you need individuals as leaders. That's why I said I'm looking at you folks as being leaders. You know, you've got to get up there, you've got to be able to explain to them exactly what you would like. The trouble is, we're part of the executive branch, so we're very driven by the politics. You don't have a lot of independence unless you sway these people. And it's not only the congressman, it's their staffers. The congressman is just sitting there because someone's given him a paper and he reads like I read. You know, I don't think any one of them, to a large degree, has a great in-depth understanding of the program. It's their staffers that they rely on to give them the information. And I've worked with some of the staffers too, and you'd be surprised how you open up their eyes. I had one comment, oh, I'll be sure to tell Senator McCain about that. I didn't realize that. You know, you have to work with people. Like I said, this email, you know, face-to-face, talk with them. You put the problem out on the table and just get a fact-finding, heart-to-heart discussion going. You know, don't try to blow smoke up anybody's skirt or, you know, pull wool over anybody's eyes. You just tell them the way it is. And I think Mike Griffin had a problem with that because he would really get very hard over on it and didn't play the politics well. But he was a leader and was one of the better administrators that we had. So I wouldn't say that putting it under DoD would be any different. I mean, we'd just be sucked up and probably have less of an opportunity to do things. Now it's interesting in reflecting on the opportunity to do things. A couple of months ago, I happened to go home, make lunch, turn the TV on just to catch up on the news, and there was caught my interest there. They were talking about DARPA, and they were raving about how DARPA is allowed to fail. And I'm listening to that. I said, what? Oh yeah, they were saying, oh yeah, we don't expect, you know, and these are the reporters talk. Oh, you know, DARPA is a government agency, and they're not expected to really succeed. In fact, they're thinking beyond the box. And I'm thinking to myself, whoa, 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 you know, we make a mistake and everybody climbs down our throat, you know. But here was DARPA. They were just ragging on them about how wonderful they had this opportunity to fail. I thought, man, maybe we got to structure ourselves like DARPA.
I saw that too, and I was yelling at the TV.
Yeah, I did the same thing. Well, I hope that answered your question. But
Yes,
you know, it's the young people like yourselves that become the leaders that have to bring the story to Congress. You know, if you have the opportunity as you progress through your career, I like to see you become more influential in making policy and helping policy be made, and that's how it works.
How do you get at the staffers?
Well, you know, I'm not politically attuned to that degree. I mean, because of the fact we had desert rats, we've had a lot of staffers come out to visit over the period of time. You know, the headquarters would extend the interest to the congressional offices, and you know, you wouldn't get the congressman or congresswoman coming out, but they would send their staffers. And so, you know, the staffers are the people, like I say, that impart these ideas to whoever their congressman or senator is that they're reporting to. So if indeed you have things like that, bring it, and it has to be kind of, in a marketing sense, working with the headquarters people, if you could have them send out the feelers to these staffers, letting them know that you've got this activity going on and you'd like to showcase it, that's how maybe you can develop this political influence. And I think we need to do more marketing of our own too, and trying to drive it in that direction. Because you sit here and keep your head down and keep coloring, who knows what you're coloring? You want to show somebody, look at me. So I would suggest maybe getting involved a little bit in a political sense, kind of more in an indirect through these little chains of information flow. And if you can get to the staffers, I think you've got an inroad, because then whoever the representative is, be a senator or a congressman, have a better understanding of what you're trying to accomplish.
Okay, Juniper has a question.
Do you think the media helps with that, or would help even with getting at staffers? I mean, the question of, should we be under the DOD came up. The DOD can put out these awesome, exciting commercials about what it's like to be in the Air Force, but we can't do those commercials.
I don't think NASA's allowed to market. I don't know what it is. I mean, I've even had arguments with PAO about they're not doing their job, getting them, and I've, had some sharp discussions with them, and I still feel they're not getting the job done. They're not out there selling the program and convincing folks. Yeah, the thing is, and we've had good experience on Desert Rats with media. And they're all over and very interested in what we're doing. And I would encourage the promotion of any of your activities, be it Desert Rats or whatever. If you've got something to showcase, our PAO folks ought to be doing it. Most of all of you folks, I look around here, were probably excited and interested in the space program, what we did back in Apollo. It's a long time ago. But it was exciting times, and there's still a lot of exciting times ahead. But you have to kind of generate that excitement and get people to help promote it, like the media and the folks that are out there. I couldn't tell you how many times I've talked with the public, and they're very respectful of what NASA has done. They hold us in high regards, and sometimes it's very embarrassing when, I'm listening to this, and, they think we're a lot further ahead than we are, unfortunately. I think there's some people even believe that the shuttle goes to the moon, a misunderstanding. But, the perception is out there that NASA is held in a very high regard, and I'd like to maintain that, but it's going to take the leadership of you folks to keep that going and to help promote that vision and sell that vision.
Take a final question.
So I've heard Max Vegé, I may be misquoting it, but he said something effectively on the shuttle program. We had all the people we needed. We couldn't have done it with more. I'm curious what your opinion is about the size of the agency and what that means to our ability to be effective. Just like a blunt.
No, it's blunt, and I'm going to give you a blunt answer too. I think we have too many. We've got good people, but the roles change. As I look through here the programs, as we turn the programs over, in a year and 8 months, we took our Mercury hat off and put our Gemini hat on, And as we went through here, at the end of Apollo, we didn't need many people because we didn't know where we were heading, really. I mean, at the end of the Apollo program, we're kind of at a quandary, too. What are we going to do in the future? And that's when a few folks got together and decided we're going to have this shuttle program. But we had a lot of people that were gone at the end of the Apollo program. I'm sorry to say, but you get to the point where you're just carrying all the FTEs just to carry FTEs, and we've become a works program instead of a development program. We got to skinny down. I mean, it's sad to say, and there's good people that we had, but we've had them for 30 years, but that program is no longer here. It's unfortunate the whole economy is the way it is. in the past, you know, you left the Apollo program, you found another job in petrochemical or energy or whatever. So that's kind of like a blunt answer. And the thing is, again, if you remember what I said about the culture, you know, we start off with R&D in the beginning, you know, and then we shifted into an ops mode because of shuttle. The R&D mode because we turn these programs over quick, and so you had to have a lot of fluidity and a lot of different concepts going. And I see the people that came in for shuttle, they're more, here's the procedures and here's the timeline and here's what we're going to do, and then, you know, you might take a few elements of the shuttle and upgrades, but it wasn't like developing a whole new concept from the ground up. That's a different world. That's a different world, and that's a whole different talk too about programs in nature and the discipline and the technical management of those programs. And you have to be kind of schooled and educated in that kind of an environment. It's hard to take an MOD person and thrust him into R&D. By the same token, take an R&D person and throw him MOD. I mean, you know, it's still a learning process and a learning curve. So there's this transition period that we're going to be going through. We're going to be trying to find out what is the right balance. And right now it's more of a preservation of our skilled workforce. Okay, but what is our skilled workforce? What are we focusing in on? And I think that's part of the problem. We don't really know what we're focusing in on. We've got this flexible path that we might be able to go to the asteroids or the Lagrangian points, go to explore Phoebus and Deimos, and then maybe Mars out there. But in reality, what is the workforce you need, and what are you going to really have to focus on?
Just the time frame in which you think it's different.
Time frame's different, and you know, I don't know. You know, the way things are, I don't know if we'll ever get a lot of big money programs again. I think, you know, with the demise of the shuttle program and this play on international cooperation and then the emphasis on commercialization of space, if we'll ever see a big program like we did for Apollo, you know, will we have a big program that says, here, we need this big human spaceflight program to go to Mars? I don't know. I don't know. Wish I could read the crystal ball. But it seems that we've fractured ourselves and we're trying to get all of these lined up some way to be able to accomplish some goal with not spending as much money, but then we're going to have all these other problems that are going to start coming up on trying to have these international agreements, and everybody wants to be a partner. And that means they're going to want to have their industry doing things, and that's going to be competitive with our industry. So it's going to be a complicated world. It's going to be a complicated, more so than when I was in the Apollo program in the early days. It was very focused, and you know, it was a totally different environment.
It was a race.
It was a race. You know.
That question was kind of a wet blanket. Has anybody asked when you changed your name to Joe Kosmo?
That's been in my family for I don't know how long. I don't know. Maybe it was ingrained in me.
What nationality is?
It's Polish and Russian.
Okay.
Yeah.
One more, and
One last question, Joe.
Oh, hey there, Sudhakar.
It's very good to see you and very sad to see you leave.
I appreciate that.
You never leave.
Well, there's one of the founding fathers of Desert Rats, too.
Well, founding partners of Joe Kosmo. Joe, you mentioned, I think that in the middle of the talk, how much we have discounted the need to go back to moon, and you equate it to, like, you know, spending 2 hours in downtown doesn't mean that you know anything about downtown. How come that we completely lost that? Because there was a lot of discovering of, oh, we don't need to go to the moon. If you want to go to Mars and then colonize it, or whatever it is that we want to do, it's a good stepping stone, and somehow that never been articulated and discussed, and see the value of returning to the moon for a real purpose of learning the experience and acquiring the experience of what we need to do. How did we lose that?
I don't think anyone stood up and said you're wrong. I think people just said, oh, he said that, so we better not do it. You know, I don't know, Sudhakar. I mean, I would have argued with the man. I would have put the facts out and said, hey, you know, we don't know that much about it. But a lot of it is political in nature. You know, it wasn't his vision. See, a new administration comes in, you have to have a vision. And you don't want to take the old guy's vision, you know. He's out of office. Here's my vision. I happen to feel that way. I think that happens with politics in general. I've seen a lot of that, you know, where it's just the influencing factor of the administration that comes to bear, and, you know, they want to put their print on it, and, you know, that wasn't in their best agenda. That wasn't in their feeling. That's my opinion.
Okay, well, I think we better wrap it up. So, thank you, Joe.
Well, thank you for listening.
The good news is that Joe says he's going to stay in the area, although he has 3 residents.
We'll have a weekly meeting at Perry's Grill
There
on Wednesday.
Tabs on you.
Yeah.
The even better news is that there's talks that Joe's probably going to publish a book. And some of the information he shared with you today is a contribution to that book. So I'm going to try to potentially get some of that information to share with you guys, like his chronology of history. Maybe you can share that with us, Joe. That'd be great. I do have a copy of Dick Johnson's Oral History Project. We'll try to get that out to you as well. So we'll send that out as a package of resource for attending today. As well, what I'd like for you to do is make sure you fill out your evaluations, and even more important is that Joe has agreed to come back and share some of his thoughts with us more in a lessons learned course-like format, where he does have presentations on items like technical areas like innovation and that sort of thing. So on the back of your evaluation, if you have a specific area that you would like to hear from Joe, please write it down there, and we'll try to include it, because we'll be I'll be working with him to kind of put together a potential array of different technical areas that we can have him back to talk to us about. So thank you, Joe, once again, and I'd like to leave you with one thing you always like to do, is a big hug.
Oh, yeah, I never pass on that. Thank you.
Thank you.